Yeah, you're asking me to be a mind reader, and I can't really do it. But I'll say that when the decision was announced to change the Constitution and have a referendum, as I looked at the changes, I thought at the time that this would be a natural consequence of those changes. The wife of the president, Mary Bon Alieva, would become vice president. Excuse me. The timing, I'm not so sure about. I don't really know why he chose this particular point to make this decision. But for people looking on from the outside world, that really is an unusual development. We've had experience in our own country of the brother of President Kennedy being named Attorney General and playing a very close role as an advisor. President Clinton's wife, Hillary Clinton, during his first administration, played a role on health care, unofficially, a government role, but not in a formal sense. And as I thought about it, and I don't pretend to be a student of the history of governance around the world, I can only think of one other country which would be similar to this, and that would be Argentina at the end of Juan Perón's presidency, when he named his wife Evita vice president. So there aren't really many examples. I can see many complications arising from this, but it's a very unusual thing. It looks to an outsider like it's become a monarchy, where members of the family now are occupying key positions of government, and I'm not sure that's the model that everyone had hoped Azerbaijan would follow at this point. I worry about the future of democracy, because this is not a step in the direction of greater involvement of the people and the possibility for a democracy to develop in the way that we had all hoped 25 years ago. Well, it could be that, to have not all the attention always on him and what he's doing. She has a different image. She's, in a public sense, she's been portrayed as someone concerned about Azerbaijani society, art, and culture. When I was ambassador, my wife Anne, along with Mary Bon, organized a group called the Friends of Azerbaijani Culture to raise money to support the development of traditional Azerbaijani culture during a time before there was a lot of oil revenue. And so, she showed a genuine interest in helping things culturally in Azerbaijan. So it's a different image than if you will, a traditional politician who may have spent years either in the apparat or in the Milli Majlis. But I think that really doesn't in any way help the image of Azerbaijan, because at the same time this is going on, as you know, families of journalists and people who are in exile have been arrested, called in, well, maybe not arrested, but certainly called in the police station to be questioned. This is not, again, the kind of image that you want to have if you are concerned about what the rest of the world thinks. And it seems like I would go back to December of 2014 when Ramiz Mekhtiev issued his rather long polemic. From that point, it became clear to me that this current regime really wasn't going to care that much what the West thought, what the United States thought, and pursue a path that unfortunately has led to where we are today, of the appearance of an increasingly autocratic regime where corruption unfortunately is still rife. You know, I think they've become more fearful of what people say outside of Azerbaijan, so that, you know, to me it's interesting that some of the people who've been arrested or the family members are people are of people who, you know, use social media or are working outside of Azerbaijan and have, you know, posted things on Facebook that are critical of the government. It's taken it a step further. I mean, it's one thing to arrest journalists inside Azerbaijan who may, you know, try to pursue, you know, freedom of expression and independent media. But now to take it even one step further, where you're going after the families of people who haven't been convicted of anything but are outside the country, it's a sign of I think of greater concern about vulnerability of the regime to criticism. And so I don't, you know, to me nothing like this happens by accident in Azerbaijan. I don't understand the precise connections, but I would imagine there is a connection, that the government is saying, look, the regime is saying we're going to do this and we won't allow any criticism, and if you do criticize us from abroad, we will touch your families.
But to be fair, I mean, they don't even get any criticism, face any criticism
no,
from the
well,
Western.
I mean, that's another interesting thing about the timing, and maybe the fact that the U.S. government is going through this rather lengthy transition period made Ilham Aliyev feel, well, I can do this and I won't face any criticism. He's assuming that the Trump administration will be less concerned about human rights and democracy issues than the Obama administration. But I just saw this morning a piece in the Washington Post where they were congratulating the Trump administration for the hard line it was taking on human rights and democracy violations in Venezuela. Well, that, you know, we don't, if there are unknowns about what's going on in Baku, there are unknowns about what's going on in Washington. So it may be incorrect to assume that this transition period where we aren't paying as much attention to this and a whole range of other problems is going to continue. It's you know, there's a certain risk associated with assuming that they're going to be able to continue along this path of greater and greater repression. I think there's a real risk of that, because if you look in example that I was talking to a colleague about today is that the apparent decision very early on that the Trump administration was going to move our embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu comes to Washington, and that doesn't seem to be an issue that was discussed. And apparently the Prime Minister of Israel was surprised when President Trump at his press conference, with the two of them present, said something critical of Israeli settlement policy. The first issue a foreign policy issue, was the apparent decision to abandon the one China policy, and yet, you know, less than a month or so later, President Trump says he still pursues the one China policy. Well, now you've got confusion. Maybe Beijing doesn't know what the U.S. is going to do, and therefore has to be very, very careful. And if you know, they move too quickly one way or another, there are going to be consequences. So it is, I think, in other places as well, and Azerbaijan may be one of those. It's too soon to assume what will be the pattern of behavior and what will be different than what was done under the Obama administration. Now, if the United States, you know, again, there's ambiguity in what the administration has said. My assumption was, given everything that was said during the campaign and during the transition period, that the United States would quickly move to abandon the 5+1 agreement on nuclear. That hasn't happened yet. Yet, Israel is pretty confident the United States is going to take a harder line. Well, let's say we did do that. It would put Azerbaijan in a very difficult position because they are seen as being not only pro-Israeli but to a certain degree pro-American. If suddenly we reimpose sanctions on Iran, or even worse, if there was some kind of military action, Azerbaijan would be very vulnerable to Iranian retaliation. And we saw just a small example of that after Netanyahu came to Baku. Not that long after, maybe a month, if it wasn't the Iranian ambassador, officials of the Iranian embassy met with Rael. I think it was Rael.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's something the Iranians have been very careful about. Yet, as an outsider looking at, I see that as a way of sending a message. Now, if you go to the more extreme situation of reapplying sanctions or some sort of U.S.-Israeli coalition against Iran to act even militarily, then Azerbaijan becomes even more vulnerable. So that would be the first place. I don't think, even if there was a closer relationship between Moscow and the U.S., that there would be much of a change in how the U.S. viewed the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the role of Russia. Quite frankly, Russia has been very consistent in its engagement in the Minsk group, and even when they've acted unilaterally, I would say, the positions that the foreign minister has taken have been quite consistent with the positions that the Minsk group has developed about both the responsibility of both sides to reach an agreement that then would be acceptable. So I wouldn't see much changing on that front. I'm not sure there would be a whole lot of interest in a strategic relationship with Azerbaijan beyond the level that we have today. Energy is not as important, but I think the real thing to watch will be the Iranian part of this. Again, if the steps that have been taken in the last days are aimed at solidifying an autocratic regime, and there's no other way to describe it than that, then I find it hard for them to somehow kind of control the levers in a way. The accelerator is going forward on that, and rather than open opportunities for freedom of expression and building democracy, they're shutting them down, even to a level which outsiders would look at and say, why are you worried about what somebody puts on their Facebook page? Unless you really are worried. It's hard to answer the question because we still don't have people in the key positions in the Department of State to sort of navigate the policy as directed by the president. So it's very difficult to say when you just have acting assistant secretaries and all. I don't at this point see human rights and democracy as major priorities of the administration, but I could be 6 months from now saying something quite different. But it will not be the policy of the Obama administration, that's for sure. So I think we're entering a period where you will not see even statements coming from press spokesmen, if we have a press conference at the State Department again soon, about human rights violations. But as I said, this Venezuela case is kind of interesting. I need to learn a little bit more about that, because even there, I think there was a concern, that maybe the government had gone too far. The second area that I'm worried about is Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. It's going to be hard to sustain the Minsk Group process without some very high-level engagement and push. It was good that the ambassador to the UN, U.S. ambassador to the UN, apparently said that the United States would continue to support the Minsk Group process, and some meeting up in New York on peacekeeping or whatever. So that's good, but it's too risky a situation now, where I worry that when spring comes and the weather is not a factor, that we could end up in an April 2016-like situation, either by choice or by accident, at a time when the United States is not as fully engaged. French elections are going to take place this year, I think, this year. Russia's okay. I mean, I don't see any change there, but it'd be very hard to have a coherent, hard push on NK at this time. So those are the two things that I would be most concerned about: the lack of leadership at the implementing level in the State Department, and then the lack of political commitment necessary for the NK issue to keep it in very visible